So what might some other considerations be here? So in response, we might say that James's criticism is unfair. Um, if we go back and read Clifford's argument, we might want to interpret him as saying only that we should believe things based on sufficient evidence rather than on conclusive evidence. So maybe James is kind of straw manning Clifford's position here by suggesting that he is committed to a stronger principle than he actually is. So that's at least one counter argument that we can give there. So when we kind of now that we've covered Clifford and James's positions, maybe take a moment to think about who do you find yourself leaning towards, Clifford or James? So if you're with Clifford, you're defending this kind of strong evidentialism where you're saying you can never be justified in believing something if you don't have sufficient evidence for it. Whereas if you're with James, you can say that there's at least some cases where you can form beliefs permissibly without sufficient evidence. And then, whichever side that you think is most compelling, try and now think about what does this say for your view on our question. So it seems like one of the things that is maybe worth noting here is that James's principle only applies in those cases where one faces a genuine option that is not settled by the evidence. And so that's not going to be every case. And indeed, when it comes to cases that are settled by the evidence, James seems pretty happy to go for some form of evidentialism, i.e., the idea that we should apportion our beliefs on the basis of the evidence. And so it seems like as much as we have this disagreement between Clifford and James in terms of what you're allowed to do, there might still be some common ground here that's relevant for our question, which is, if we have cases which are settled by the evidence, people should, form beliefs on the basis of the evidence. And that's enough for maybe us to say that we should hold them accountable if they don't do that. So another thing that's kind of interesting here, we saw this in the first lecture, is thinking about, how much evidence do we actually need in order to form our beliefs responsibly? And one of the insights that might be important here is, the amount of evidence that we need might potentially vary based on the practicality of the situation. So it might not be a hard and fast, rule of epistemology. It might be something that's sensitive to the situation. So, for example, compare the case where, I'm a pilot and I want to form the belief that the plane will not, crash into the ground based on some terrible fault. It seems like I need a lot of evidence to, form that belief, because if I get it wrong, then it's really bad. Whereas if I'm forming my belief that, my toast won't burn when I put it in the toaster, it seems like I'm kind of happy enough to say that I can legitimately form that belief without loads of evidence, because as much as I can kind of appeal to some pretty general evidence, but also if I get it wrong, it's maybe not that bad. And then finally, a last question that we're going to think about is both of the authors use kind of moral language to talk about the duties that apply to beliefs. So we spoke in the first lecture thinking about the kinds of norms that apply to beliefs and what kinds of norms we're going to invoke when we hold people responsible. So one of the things that's important then is thinking about what exactly those norms are. It seems like both of them, both Clifford and James, are kind of switching up between whether they're talking about epistemic norms or moral norms and the relation between these two. And so it's going to be important to think about, how exactly are we holding people responsible? Are we saying that they're irrational and they shouldn't be irrational, or they're immoral and they shouldn't be immoral?